Grains have long been a staple in diets around the world, but few people pause to consider their deeper history, their role in ancient societies, and most intriguingly, how they fit within the context of biblical diets. For many, the question arises, what did people in biblical times actually eat, and how do grains factor into that story? The untold truth about grains and the biblical diet is a tapestry woven of history, culture, faith, and evolving nutritional science. To begin, it's important to understand that the concept of a biblical diet refers to the foods commonly eaten by people living in the lands and times described in the Bible, particularly ancient Israel and the surrounding regions from roughly 2000 BCE to the early centuries CE. These societies were agricultural, and their diets were profoundly influenced by the crops they could grow, the animals they could raise, and the rhythms of the seasons. Grains in particular were central. Wheat and barley were the primary cereal crops in the ancient Near East, and both are mentioned repeatedly in the Bible. In fact, when the Israelites are told they will enter a land flowing with milk and honey, it is also described as a land of wheat and barley, and vines, and fig trees, and pomegranates, a land of olive oil and honey. This list provides a snapshot of the agricultural bounty that was both the sustenance and the blessing of ancient Israel. Wheat, prized for its versatility and flavor, was a symbol of abundance and prosperity. Barley, more hardy and resilient, was the grain of the common people, used to make bread for the masses and even animal feed. The importance of grains is reflected not just in daily meals, but also in religious rituals and offerings. Grain offerings, or mincha, were a key part of temple worship, often involving unleavened bread or cakes made from fine flour. The Passover festival, the most significant annual observance in Judaism, features unleavened bread, or matzah, commemorating the Israelites' hasty departure from Egypt. But beyond their symbolic and ritual significance, grains sustained life. Bread was the staff of life, and for many ancient people, it was the main source of calories. A typical meal in ancient Israel might consist of bread, some olives, a few figs or dates, and a little cheese. Meat was rare and reserved for special occasions. The bread itself could range from simple flatbreads baked on hot stones to more elaborate loaves, depending on the wealth of the family and the availability of ingredients. Yet the story of grains in the biblical diet is more nuanced than simply grains are good. There are hints in the Bible that not all bread is created equal, and that the overconsumption or misuse of grains could be seen as a curse rather than a blessing. For example, in Genesis, Adam and Eve's expulsion from Eden comes with the declaration that Adam will eat bread by the sweat of your brow. This association of bread with toil and hardship reflects the reality that agriculture, while enabling civilization, also brought new challenges: dependence on weather, the threat of famine, and the backbreaking labor of plowing, planting, and harvesting. Moreover, some biblical passages suggest a certain ambivalence toward grains. In the book of Daniel, Daniel and his companions refuse the rich foods and wine of the Babylonian court, choosing instead a diet of vegetables and water. After 10 days, they are found to be healthier and stronger than those who ate the king's fare. While this story is often cited in support of plant-based or Daniel fast diets today, it also reflects an ancient wisdom about moderation, simplicity, and the dangers of overindulgence. What about the specific types of grains consumed in biblical times? Archaeological evidence in ancient texts suggests that wheat and barley were by far the most important, but other grains like spelt, emmer, and millet also played a role, especially in times of drought or scarcity. These grains were often less refined than the ones we eat today. Ancient flour was typically stone ground, resulting in a coarse, whole grain product rich in fiber and nutrients. The bread made from it was denser and more filling, a far cry from the soft, white loaves that line modern supermarket shelves. The way grains were processed and consumed in ancient times is another key difference. Modern grain processing removes the bran and germ, stripping away much of the fiber, vitamins, and minerals. In contrast, the bread of biblical times retained these components, making it a much healthier staple. Furthermore, the process of leavening, using wild yeast to ferment the dough, may have made ancient bread more digestible and nutritious. Sourdough fermentation, for example, breaks down some of the gluten and phytic acid, making nutrients more bioavailable. This brings us to an important point. The grains of the Bible and the grains of today are not identical. Over millennia, wheat has been selectively bred for higher yields, easier milling, and improved baking qualities. The result is modern wheat varieties that are very different from their ancient ancestors, both genetically and nutritionally. Some researchers believe that these changes, along with the rise of processed foods and sedentary lifestyles, may help explain the increasing prevalence of gluten sensitivities and other grain-related health issues in the modern era. This divergence has led to a growing interest in ancient grains like einkorn, emmer, and spelt, which are closer to the grains eaten in biblical times. These grains are often touted for their superior nutritional profiles and lower gluten content, and they are increasingly available to health-conscious consumers. However, it's important to remember that ancient does not automatically mean better for everyone. Individual tolerance to grains varies, and some people, such as those with celiac disease, must avoid gluten entirely, regardless of the grain's pedigree. The biblical perspective on food, including grains, is not just about what is eaten, but how and why. Food is seen as a gift from God, to be received with gratitude and shared in community. The Sabbath meal, the Passover feast, the festival of Pentecost, these were as much about fellowship and spiritual meaning as about physical nourishment. The act of breaking bread together was, and remains, a symbol of unity and hospitality. Curiously, the Bible also contains stories of fasting and abstinence, suggesting that periods of going without food, or specific types of food, can have spiritual significance. Fasting was often a response to crisis, repentance, or the desire for divine guidance. It was a way to humble oneself, to focus on prayer, and to remember dependence on God rather than on material abundance. In recent years, interest in biblical diets has surged, fueled by books, documentaries, and diet plans claiming to recreate the eating patterns of ancient Israel. Some emphasize the consumption of whole, unprocessed foods. Others advocate for the elimination of modern grains or the adoption of intermittent fasting. While these approaches can offer valuable insights, it's important to approach them with a critical eye. The diet of an ancient shepherd or farmer was shaped by necessity, not by choice, and often lacked the variety and abundance available to us today. Furthermore, the Bible is not a nutrition textbook. Its dietary laws, such as those found in Leviticus and Deuteronomy, were as much about ritual purity and cultural identity as about health. The prohibition of certain animals, the rules about clean and unclean foods, and the instructions for preparing and consuming offerings all served to set the Israelites apart from their neighbors and to reinforce their relationship with God. Yet within these ancient texts, there is a thread of wisdom that still resonates: the importance of wholesome, minimally processed foods, the value of balance and moderation, the recognition that food is more than fuel. It is a means of connection, celebration, and spiritual reflection. Science now supports some of these insights. Modern nutritional research confirms that whole grains, such as those eaten in biblical times, are rich in fiber, vitamins, minerals, and phytochemicals that support heart health, digestive health, and stable blood sugar levels. Diets high in whole grains are associated with lower risks of chronic diseases, including heart disease, diabetes, and certain cancers. At the same time, the overconsumption of refined grains, sugar, and processed foods is linked to the very health problems that plague many contemporary societies. The shift from traditional grain-based diets to modern, industrialized diets has had profound consequences for public health. Consequences that perhaps could have been foreseen by those ancient sages who warned against excess and complacency. So what is the untold truth about grains in the biblical diet? It is a story of adaptation, resilience, and meaning. Grains sustained empires, fed prophets, and shaped the rituals and rhythms of daily life. They were both a blessing and a burden, a symbol of abundance and a reminder of toil. The ancient wisdom embedded in biblical food traditions, balance, gratitude, community, and respect for the land, remains as relevant today as ever. Whether you choose to eat grains or abstain from them, the deeper lesson is one of mindfulness and intention. To eat with awareness, to honor the sources of our food, and to recognize the ways in which our choices connect us to history, to each other, into something greater. The biblical diet is not a prescription, but an invitation to live with humility, gratitude, and care, both for our bodies and for the world we share. In the end, perhaps the greatest truth about grains in the biblical diet is not found in what is eaten, but in how we eat, with reverence, with joy, and with an openness to the wisdom of those who came before us. In the breaking of bread, we find not just sustenance, but a reminder of our shared story, a story that continues to unfold one meal at a time.